Hello, welcome to FPL Have a Beer, where I ask you to have a beer with me and discuss FPL. What could be better? If you like the video, please like and subscribe. And thank you to everyone who liked and subscribed and even watched the last video. It's very much appreciated. Okay, so I mentioned in the last video that I've done some research into fantasy football and mental health, and I thought this topic would be a good way to bring a little bit of that in. And today, what I want to specifically talk about is FPL deadline streams. I'm sure we've all seen them, and particularly what I want to ask is: A, are they actually helpful for our FPL teams? Is watching them actually helpful for our FPL teams? And B, is it a good thing that we watch them, even if they are good for our teams? We get up, some people abroad, at ridiculous times in the morning to watch them, probably lose a lot of sleep, and then go back to bed just to watch an hour and a half stream on a game. A game we can't even actually really win anything, apart from some Premier League tickets. So that's the question I'm going to ask today. So this is the comment that made me decide to record this particular video, and it was on Andy's deadline stream this week. And the comment says, FPL from the US is tough. Try to wake up early before the deadline to see if there are any leaks before moving. I assume he means transfers there. Overslept, didn't make the transfers I planned on, messed it up. Haha. Now, that is pretty crazy to me. As I said in the last video, I'm a fairly serious fantasy football player, but I don't get up most of the time. I like to have a line in the morning, guys. I don't get up most of the time to watch deadline streams if they're before 12 p.m. So the fact this person, it could be a lady I guess, has got up in the middle of the night, well, didn't get up in the middle of the night, but I assume has been getting up in the middle of the night for the season so far, to get up and make their transfers based on any leaks Andy might have got, was quite crazy to me. So it just sort of inspired me to make a video about if these deadline streams are any good in terms of our FPL teams, and also just are they any good for us from a mental health perspective. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So how many people watch these deadline streams? So this week is a fairly standard week in FPL. For anyone watching this back in the future, it's a 24-25 season. It's game week 8. There's nothing particularly exciting happening this week. I guess Saka was a doubt, who's in some FPL teams, but then there's almost an injury doubt, I mean by that. But then there's almost always an injury doubt every game week about some player who's in a lot of players' teams. So I wouldn't have said this week was particularly different than most weeks. And I had a look briefly over the main people who do FPL deadlines. So that's FPL Raptor, Harry, Focal, Let's Talk FPL, and FPL Mate actually had a very small view count compared to the other channels in terms of his deadline stream. But anyway, I added them all up together and it came up to roughly 400,000 people. So on a given week, I guess some people could have been watching 2 deadline streams at the same time, but roughly 300,000 to 400,000 people are watching these deadline streams every single week. And this was in a fairly normal week, so I guess that could even go up higher if it was a double game week, for example, or a game week where lots of people are on wildcard. So yeah, it's quite a significant amount of the community, at least the community who are actively engaged on things like Twitter and regularly watching YouTube content. So I want to discuss two things. Firstly, does watching these YouTube streams actually help us? And secondly, even if they do, are they worth it in terms of the time commitment and other reasons that I'll get into later, mental health reasons, in terms of when we watch them. So, briefly worth mentioning, there's been a debate going on for years about whether or not FPL should do something. The reason that FPL deadlines are so popular, in case you're not aware, is because of team leaks. So the deadline to make your transfers used to be an hour before the kickoffs. FPL moved it a few years ago to an hour and a half before the kickoffs. But basically, most of the big YouTube channels often get leaks about whether or not particular players are playing or not. So, for example, this week, Saka was a doubt. As far as I'm aware, none of the YouTube content creators who do deadline streams actually got any information on whether Saka was in the team or not. But in some weeks, they might get a leak, I assume from someone in Arsenal's training ground or somebody who works for Arsenal, that Saka may or may not be playing. He would then share that information with the viewers, and then we would use that information to make our transfers. Usually it doesn't happen early in the deadline stream. Usually it happens towards the end. So usually any transfers based on the information in a deadline stream doesn't really come around until right towards the end of the deadline stream. So FPL are not going to move that. People have talked about completely getting rid of deadlines or preempted deadlines and just wait until the kickoff time of the first game in the game week. So basically we'll know the team news, which would stop leaks happening. Personally, I probably think that's the best idea. I believe other FPL formats do that. Or maybe everyone has to make their transfers the evening or the night before the day that the first game's on. I guess that would stop some of that. But, I mean, I guess then there'd still be some sort of leaks. But anyway, it's fairly clear that FPL are not interested in doing that because people have been talking about that for years. Much of FPL player base is abroad, places like America, India, I think quite a bit in the Asian countries. Meaning those people have to get up sometimes at ridiculous time to make their transfers and to get the leaks, and they haven't showed any interest in moving it so far. So I doubt they're going to in the future. So leaks are a thing. FPL deadline streams are therefore going to be a thing. You can't blame content creators for making them. I mean, why would you blame them? They basically make a shitload of money off these streams. So if you ever watch one, super chats will be going in all of the time. Who should I captain? Should I bench Chris Wood or Calvert-Lewin or Davis or whoever? And the FPL content creator, basically that super chat guarantees you an answer, pretty much. And I imagine they probably make more money from that stream than maybe they do for the rest of the week for all of their content, or at least a significant amount of their income is going to come from that. So when FPL are not going to change the deadline system, and FPL content creators, they make a load of money. FPL streams are always going to exist unless FPL change the deadline structure somehow, which is never going to happen. So, which begs the question, is watching a deadline stream helpful? So first of all, is it helpful for your team? So here I can only speak from personal experience. There are no studies or no research it'd be really interesting if there was some research into this that looks at how many points your transfer. Say that you make your transfer based on some information in the deadline stream, an injury or a player not being injured. How much that would will correlate with your team scoring more points or less points compared to had you not made the same transfer at all, or had made the transfer you'd planned all week before you got that information. But no studies, at least that I'm aware of, exist that look at that. So I can only talk from my own experience. And my own experience is deadline streams haven't really helped me. Can't say they've really hindered me either, but I don't think they've helped me. So there's kind of three potential outcomes from watching a deadline stream in terms of the information that you're going to take, which you're going to use for your team. Well, I guess four actually. First is that no information comes out that's relevant to your team. In which case you're probably just going to go ahead with the transfers you already had planned. In which case the only reason to watch the stream would be for entertainment. And I have to be honest, I find deadline streams the least entertaining thing out of all the FPL content that's out there, because basically it's just the FPL content creator answering specific super chats that are sent in that are relevant probably only to that individual's team. I'm sure there's, sometimes questions come in that would be relevant to more than one person's team, but it could be like, should I bench Pinnock or Fernandez or whatever? Very specific questions. The content creator is basically just answering those questions. It's not really that entertaining unless you're particularly interested in seeing what the content creators, what move he's going to make, or she, but in which case, you can just fast forward. You don't have to watch it live, you can just fast forward to the end of the video, which is what I usually do with Andy's videos, because he's the only deadline stream I'd watch to see what move he's made. But they're not particularly entertaining, so if there's no information in there relevant to your players in terms of team leagues, then in my opinion at least, there's no real point in having watched it. And that's probably the case, I'd say 50-60% of the time in the number of deadline streams that I've watched down the years. So there's then three sort of scenarios that come about from leaks that are relevant to your or relevant to your FPL team. So the first is that the leak is correct. Yeah. So the leak is that Mo Salah is not going to start, and the transfer you make based on that, let's say you transfer in Palmer, works out better than the original transfer you'd planned for that week. To say that you'd actually planned to sell Robertson and bring Porro in that week, and that transfer would have got you 0 points, but the move you made based on the leak got you 16 points. In which case, it was good information, the leak was true, and the transfer you made gained you more points than the transfer you would have otherwise made. So an example of this, in my own time watching deadline streams, if I think back to 2000 and just before COVID, it was very early 2020, I transferred out Jimenez based on a very late leak in one of Andy's streams, and I transferred in Vardy, and I think Vardy scored a hat-trick or something, and it gave me like 20 odd points. So that's the example of when it's good, when it does work. But in my experience, remembering that only about 50% of the time is any information or leaks going to actually come up that are relevant to your team, that is outbalanced by times things went wrong. So the first thing that can go wrong is that the leak is bad, and therefore you waste the transfer. So Jimenez wasn't injured in my last example, and in Vardy. So I didn't transfer in Vardy. Jimenez scores 6. Vardy also scores 6. And therefore, I've basically just wasted a transfer if I didn't plan to bring Vardy in originally, because the outcomes were exactly the same. So, I mean, it's possible that you could make that transfer and it still works out. But if you're basing the transfer on incorrect team leaks, and therefore ignoring your original plans, more often than not, it's going to go wrong. The third outcome is probably the most frustrating, and that's when the leak's correct, but the transfer you make based on the leak still ends up costing you points. And this is the outcome that probably happened when I make a transfer based on a team leak. This is the outcome that I probably have more than any other. So let's say that the leak is that Jimenez is out, and I bring Vardy in because Jimenez is out, and Vardy scores me 6 points, and Jimenez does miss out, he gets 0. But the original transfer that I was going to make was Isaac to Watkins, because Watkins had a better fixture, and Watkins scores 20 points and Isaac only scores 2. I've obviously therefore got a net gain. I've gained, I can't remember the example again. I've gained 4 points from the transfer I made based on the leak, but I actually would have gained 18 points had I just have gone with the original transfer I had planned. And if you're a serious FPL manager, you put a lot of time usually in the week planning your transfer. So usually that transfer, with long-term fixtures in mind, with the finances you have available in your team in mind, more often than not, that is going to be the correct transfer. So I would say, based on my experience, and again, this is just anecdotal, it's just me. I'd say 50% of the time I watch deadline streams, there's nothing relevant comes up. And when something relevant does come up, usually, at best, 50% of the time, the information I use based on the leak actually helps my team. But probably more often than not, it doesn't. So, going by that logic, if I'm watching it, spending an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on the content creator, watching a stream that I don't particularly find entertaining, I find all their other content entertaining, but I don't find deadline streams entertaining. 50% of the time, no relevant information will come up, and even if it does, at least 50% of the time, probably more, if I act on that information, it's going to be to the detriment of my team. So I would argue, from the pure perspective, this is again anecdotal, of how much watching an FPL stream is going to actually help in terms of basic FPL points. I would say 50% of the time it's going to be irrelevant, and when it is relevant, slightly more often than not, it's going to be to the detriment of your overall team. So I'd argue, therefore, at the very best, it will, there's no real effect on it helping your team. And at worst, some of this is probably down to me not being the greatest FPL player, it's going to damage your team. So I would argue it's probably not worth watching them just in terms of the FPL points you're going to gain from the information gleaned from them. But I guess you could argue, if you're actually on Twitter and you follow the links that Andy maybe is following up on, you could figure out what leaks are correct, what leaks are incorrect. If you're a better player than me, maybe you would get more benefit in terms of your FPL team than I would. So therefore I go to, what are the negatives of listening to deadline streams beyond the simple effects it has on our FPL team. So first of all, we've got our poor lad here, and this isn't the first comment on YouTube or Reddit I've read like this, where he's getting up in the middle of the night, watching an hour and a half deadline stream to see if anything's going on in terms of team leaks, and then he's trying to go back to bed again. That does not sound healthy to me. The only time I would advocate for someone to get up in the middle of the night on purpose to do something is if you've got a young baby and the baby's crying and the baby needs feeding. Then you need to get up in the middle of the night to tend to the baby or feed them or whatever. In my opinion, you shouldn't be getting up in the middle of the night to see whether or not Smith Rowe is starting or Rico Lewis is starting. I just find that crazy. I only, as I said earlier, I think I live in the UK and I often don't get up to watch deadline streams. The only time I'll definitely do it is if I'm on wildcard, because then I have the ability to make lots of changes instead of just using one or two free transfers. But yeah, to me this is pretty crazy. I guess if you're a young guy or girl, you've got no responsibilities, maybe you're a student, your sleep pattern doesn't really matter too much in terms of your overall life or your responsibilities. You can get up at 3 in the morning, watch the deadline stream, and then go back to bed at 4:30. I mean, for me, if I got up and watched the stressful deadline stream and then tried to go back to bed, it would probably take me a couple of hours to get to sleep. But I guess if you're young and so on, that's fine. Perhaps, but I'm imagining there are probably people outside of the UK who do this, who aren't in that situation where it's really not okay. So, I don't know. But what about people in the UK like me, who can get up quite easily and watch these deadline streams in normal waking hours, if I wanted to, and act on them anyway? So, I mentioned in my last video and earlier on that I've done some research on mental health, and although we didn't test this specifically, that research would suggest that perhaps, no, this isn't the best thing to do. So, in the study that I'm referring to, we gave questionnaires to about 2,000 FPL players. We asked them lots and lots and lots of things. But in relevance to this, what we asked them, that's relevant to this, is how often do you make last-minute transfers? And we then looked at whether or not making last-minute transfers compared to not making last-minute transfers is related to things such as stress, depression, or anxiety that is brought on by FPL. So I'm not talking about stress, anxiety, and depression in everyday life. We said how often do you make FPL last-minute transfers, and how much does this cause you? It's a correlational study, but how much do you experience stress, anxiety, and depression as a result of FPL? And we found that people who make last-minute transfers are more likely to experience stress, depression, and anxiety because of FPL than people who don't make last-minute transfers. Now, I know making last-minute transfers is not exactly the same as watching a deadline stream. I mean, someone could make last-minute transfers and not watch a deadline stream, or, well, yeah, that they could do that. But I'm imagining a lot of people making last-minute transfers are probably watching a deadline stream, because otherwise, even if they're not watching a deadline stream, they're at least checking Twitter, etc., for team news updates, because otherwise, why would you do it? It wouldn't really make any sense. So it appears, at least from the study we did, that making last-minute transfers compared to not making last-minute transfers, so I suppose making your transfer the night before, is more likely if you make last-minute transfers to the FPL is therefore going to make you feel anxious, stressed, depressed. Why would that be? I would argue, we didn't measure why it might be, but I'm going to guess or speculate that it's probably that last-minute transfers don't work out as well as well-thought-through transfers. As I said earlier, my experience is the transfers that I make based on information from a deadline stream generally don't work out. But even if they worked out at a 50-50 rate, I think there's more pleasure, psychological pleasure and positive mood to be made from making transfers that you thought about. To say that you've your game week's finished, the last game week's finished on Sunday. You've looked at your team, you've looked at the fixtures, you've thought through. Maybe you've looked at the expected goals, etc. You've thought through what transfers you're going to make next week. You've watched some content during the week. You've watched the Champions League games. And you've come to a conclusion on the Friday night about what transfers you're going to make. Now, say you make those transfers and they come off, yeah? You're going to really feel good about it. That's... it's all variance. But in your head, that's going to be, the research, how you're going to attribute that. Success is, it's because I did all the research, it's because I watched the computer games, I held to my conviction, I made those transfers, I feel good about it. And if it goes badly, well, I did my background research, it's just down to variance. If you make last minute transfers and you ignore all that research you did during the week, I would argue you're going to feel bad about ignoring all the stuff that you researched during the week, because you got this last minute team leak, and you're going to feel stupid if that actual transfer based on the team leak goes wrong, because it was just based on the team leak. You're probably going to make your decisions, last minute decisions, within a couple of minutes. So anyway, whatever the reason, it certainly appears that making last minute transfers, which I would argue are probably largely going to be made on content such as deadline streams that give us late team news, seem to be related to more anxiety, stress and depression than someone who makes their transfers the night before, for example. So, to answer the question, should you watch FPL deadline streams? It's really up to you. I'm not going to tell you yes or no. Personally, I don't. Because, as I've said, first of all, I find them pretty boring. Second of all, even if the one reason for watching them, which is, a leak that's relevant to my team, comes out, half the time if I make transfers based on that information, they don't work out. And three, as I've just said, there's evidence that making last-minute transfers isn't good for your mental health, and certainly getting up at ridiculous times in the morning, like our friend from the American here does, is to watch deadline streams is not going to help your mental health. Anyway, those are my opinions. If you disagree with me and you have another opinion, or maybe there's something I've missed out on, please tell me in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.